Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County. Here is your podcast host, Duane.
Today, we have Bill Garlick from the Fighting Falcon Military Museum in Greenville. He joined us. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Duane. I'm glad to be here.
In a nutshell, what is the museum all about?
Well, the museum is quite an interesting place. It covers the military history of Greenville from the Civil War all the way up through to the end of our modern conflict.
Back in 2011, when I was teaching a 7th hour class at the Greenville Public School, the Jacket Video Productions, my class came in and we had an opportunity to interview Bill Delp. And I understand that he passed away in 2022. We're going to go back in our time machine and we're going to take a listen to how the Military Museum had started.
The Fighting Falcon Museum got its start in the summer of 1993 when a lady named Laura Seek, who was the secretary to I believe the superintendent of schools, came to me in Belding, where I lived then, and said we would love to have a restoration of a original Fighting Falcon glider. And she said, I understand that you had a lot of experience at Gibson Refrigerator when they were built. And I said, yes, I was the tool engineer on that project when it started in early April of 1942. And she said, well, would you be willing to be a consultant, technical consultant, to a group of school kids that would like to restore a glider? And I said, yes, I would, but there's another man that lives in Greenville that worked at Gibson and was one of the main cogs in manufacturing gliders. His name was Eric Gunther. And I said, I'd like to get hold of Eric and have him be part of this project. So I got hold of Eric, and he jumped at the chance. And the two of us joined up and said, we will help you with this project. However, I have to say this, that we had our doubts that school kids could restore a CG-4A glider. It's a monstrous project. But we didn't want to discourage them, so we got started. Our first problem was getting parts and assemblies and so on. And this took us quite a bit of effort and work. And because Eric and I both knew that there were 8 companies in America that manufactured gliders in World War II, and we knew where they were, that they had surplus gliders at the end of the war, and you could go to those geographic areas in the United States and find glider parts in barns and woods and gullies.
Bill, when you started this, did you run into any problems? And were the students helping out?
Our first problem, once we started accumulating parts and assemblies, which we happened to find quite a few right around Greenville, was where are we going to get a building to restore this? So we found an old building that the Ore-Ida company, the potato plant out northeast of town, let us use an old building there, and we got started. And as it turned out, Eric and I's opinion about the kids not really being able to do this turned out to be true, because in the first place they were never available when we needed them, and it was too technical a job for young people to do. They didn't have the experience. They really just, they dropped out by themselves. They sort of gave up. So Eric and I took it over, and we found a bigger building that we really needed out on the river road south of Greenville, owned by a man named Stan Jorgensen, who was a World War II veteran. And he said, you can use my building at no charge. And through the next 12 years, Eric and I and a small handful of people restored the glider that you see in the museum here today.
What else is available at the museum?
Areas of display on this floor, this main floor, and the second floor of artifacts and information on all of the wars of our country. Basically starting with the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and we have recently added a room on the second floor that covers all of the recent wars. It's been our policy and our aim to have all of the displays are all related to local military people, men and women of all the wars, and we have restricted it to that.
We continue with the interview of Bill Delp, recorded in 2011.
The Gibson Refrigerator Company in World War II had many contracts, other than just the glider contract. We also manufactured incendiary bombs, 100-pound chemical bombs, 500-pound Navy practice bombs, wing flaps for B-24 bombers for the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, and 165-gallon jettison fuel tanks, which were used under the wings of fighter planes in World War II. These 165-gallon fuel tanks were basically used under the wings of fighter planes to increase their range. And fundamentally, they increased their range. They doubled it, so that particularly in the European part of World War II, the fighter planes could escort bombers clear into Germany, where without the fuel tanks under their wings, they were pretty limited as to what they could do to help defend them.
We hope you're enjoying our podcast, and we'll be back after we thank our sponsors. West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions, your IT and web hosting experts, westmichiganhelpdesk.com, and DW Video, your source for video production, websites, and your local videotape, slides, and 8mm film transfer specialist, dwvideo.com. Now, back to our interview.
Tell us about the incendiary bombs that were produced here in Greenville.
Incendiary bombs, that was about the first contract we had, even before a glider contract. They were a small bomb, about 2 feet long. Half of the bomb was round and the other half was hexagonal. And they were loaded with a explosive called thermite, powdered thermite, which is basically powdered magnesium, which is anybody that's had a chemistry class knows that powdered magnesium, when it is lit and it starts to burn, the minute you put water on it, it really starts to explode. Now, to back up a little, these incendiary bombs, Gibson wasn't the only company making them, and there were several companies manufactured them. But we made 750,000 of them for roughly $500,000. So they were only 75 cents a piece, which is pretty cheap warfare bombs. These small bombs were held in a canister of about 150 and held in the bomb bays of bombers. And when they were dropped out of the bomb bay over their target, the canister exploded and it blew these small 4-pound incendiary bombs. It just scattered them in the sky. And when they hit the town they were over, or their bombing target, each one exploded. And of course, it started a fire. And the minute this happened, the obvious thing that the people in this town being bombed would do would be to put water on them. When they put water on them, then they really had a problem. And these bombs were used throughout the war to literally incinerate bombing targets or towns, particularly in the early part of 1945, when the war in Germany was over. We had bomb groups in the Pacific that flew over Japanese towns, and these 4-pound incendiary bombs were dropped on these 46 towns, and they were literally burned out. And this is nothing to brag about, but it is factual. These bombs literally incinerated about 2 million Japanese people. And it had a lot to do with ending the war in Japan. And just a few weeks or a month or two later, the atomic bombs were dropped and the war in Japan was over. But the incendiary bombs had a great deal to do with that.
Other than Gibson, were there any other local companies involved in helping in the war efforts?
Federal Mogul during the war basically made propellers for the Navy, for PT boats particularly. And they made various propellers for all type of ships and boats.
How many men and women served in World War II from Greenville, and how many died?
In the town of Greenville in World War II, there were 811 men and women that served. Of this 811, 27 were women. There was a tremendous sacrifice, as there were 39 of the 811 were killed in action. And there were 9 prisoners of war. When you consider the amount of prisoners of war and the amount of deceased soldiers, it was a tremendous sacrifice for a town the size of Greenville, Michigan.
There was a local man involved in the Battle of the Bulge that delivered a message to the Germans under a flag of truce. Tell us about that.
The Battle of the Bulge took place late December of 1944 when the Germans surrounded the Americans at the town, French town of Bastogne. The Germans sent a group under a flag of truce to see General McAuliffe, who was in charge of the Americans. And the Germans wanted them to surrender. And General McAuliffe replied, "Nuts," which that word, when they were asked to surrender, became a word that went down in history. So he wrote out a message and he put nuts in it, and he said, now who is going to deliver this message? Well, a colonel by the name of Joe Harper, who incidentally was a uncle of my brother-in-law John Harper, who lives at Turk Lake, Michigan today. He said, I'll deliver it under a flag of truce. And he took his driver and his Jeep and he went through the woods with his flag of truce, and he delivered the nuts message to the Germans. When he delivered this nuts message to the German general, the German general said he did not understand. He said, "Nicht verstehe," which in German means they don't understand. So Colonel Harper told him that it meant that they were not going to surrender, and the German general told him, well, we're going to kill you all. And Colonel Harper said, well, lots of luck to you, bud. And he grabbed his Jeep driver and their Jeep and their flag of truce, and he says, let's get back to where we belong. And they went back, and several weeks later, the Germans were defeated in the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow. We just came back from 2011. A lot has changed, but there was one question that Bill did not answer. How did the glider get the name Fighting Falcon?
Yeah, that's one of those stars on the wall. The class of 1943, back during World War II, you bought war bonds to finance the war. And the class of 1943 thought, hey, what a neat project. Let's see if we can buy and sell enough war bonds to pay for one glider. Cost at that time was approximately $17,000. So they set about to do this. And in 90 days, actually raised $73,000 in World War II money. And 2005 money, that was approximately $2 million out of a town of roughly 2,000 to 5,000 people. That was pretty cool. And the War Department and the Treasury Department thought, that is excellent, and we need to emphasize this for advertising purposes so we can sell more war bonds.
Sure.
And consequently, they decided to allow the class of 1943 to have a contest and name and label one glider. And the contest was won, and the actual name that won it was the Flying Falcon. Advertising department at Gibson Refrigerator said, well, that's really not military enough. We're going to call it the Fighting Falcon, and we will still award the prize. Consequently, the glider is the only one with a label. Some of them got nose art, but it's the only one with a label. And you saw over Mr. Delp's right shoulder there, the Fighting Falcon, presented by Greenville Public Schools, Greenville, Michigan. And it was quite a feat. And there was literally, they disassembled the glider down at the plant, took it up the Greenville streets to Black Athletic Field, assembled it, and then had all kinds of dignitaries, generals, and all sorts of other people there for the dedication of the Fighting Falcon. And that is how Fighting Falcon got its name.
Wow. We have a lot of history in Montcalm County, and we've just touched on a very little bit. And I'm hoping that in the future I can bring you back and we can go into more of the military side of the history in Montcalm County. Mm-hmm. The Fighting Falcon Military Museum, where's it located? What are the hours? And how does somebody get in touch with you?
516 West Cass Street. It's in the old Cass Street School. Hours are Sunday from 2 to 4:30.
Are you also available for tours
Absolutely.
if schools and other groups want to be involved?
Yes, we're available for there are several phone numbers on the front door and on the website. Contact those people, and at some point, somebody will get back to you in the not far distant future and organize this process. We are readily available, love to do it. Somebody will get you there no matter what.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you for taking time to come in today and kind of put a bow on Mr. Delp's interview and to let people know about the Fighting Falcon Military Museum in Greenville and how they can get in touch with you. We have a lot of history. We have a lot of things happening in Montcalm County. This is just one of them, which we hope to bring you back and do some more in the future. My name is Duane from Discover Montcalm. Remember to buy and shop locally.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Duane at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.